Welcome to the Boomer Briefing Podcast, where we help you solve a critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. I'm your host, Jon Hubbard, shareholder and consultant here at Boomer Consulting, and my guest today is Amanda Wilkie. Hi, Amanda. Thanks for being on this episode of the Boomer Briefing.
Hey, Jon. Happy to be here.
It's always great to speak with you. Most of you know Amanda, but she is one of our fearless consultants, specializing in technology, process improvement, and you really coach firms in the area of project management as well. And that's something that you've had a strength in for many years, right? With your role as a CIO in firms, but also now as you're coaching, consulting, and advising firms in this space. So I love that we get a chance to talk with you about this topic. And project management in IT is the official title of this episode. So the first question I kind of want to talk to you about, or kind of ask you, to walk us through, is tell us about how project management in IT maybe has evolved over the last several years or even the last decade.
Yeah. Well, Jon, I'll share with you part of my project management experience and my journey, if you will. Project management, there's been a huge focus on it for decades and decades in every industry out there. We see it a lot in IT because IT and technology is, it's always really been project-based. I mean, think about anytime you need to implement a new technology, a new solution, even after things are implemented and you have things that need to be maintained or upgraded. We have think about the new version of Windows that's coming out in the next few months. Firms are going to have to roll that out to every machine, and that takes a lot of planning. It takes a lot of coordinating, and not all people, especially not all IT people, are necessarily good at project management. And as the organization, as IT gets bigger, those projects get bigger, they get more complex, the stakes are higher. If you don't get something right, you spend a lot of time cleaning things up and fixing things, or you have projects that never really end. You have solutions that never end up getting implemented. I think CRM is usually a good example. CRM, especially, it can grow, it can get out of scope, and it just seems like, wow, this project's really never going to end. We're going to be doing this for forever. So, in the accounting profession, over the last 10, 15 years, as firms have really grown and they have matured and their IT organization within the firm has grown, there has been more of a focus on project management. So someone who can really bring things together, communicate, motivate, build buy-in, and really organize the project. And that can really be the difference between getting something done and having it done successfully, or not getting it done, or it being very, very painful. So for me, about 10 or so years ago, I really started focusing on project management, and did the certification. So I do have my PMP, which took not only a lot of studying and coursework, but I had to show experience in project management as well. So it was a pretty rigorous process to go through. And I'll never forget some of the best advice that I got when tackling the PMP was someone told me, you're a project manager, put on your project manager hat and manage it like it is a project. And that really meant a lot to me, because I did have to manage it like a project to really make it successful. So I would say how things have really evolved over the last few years or the last decade or so is really the fact that IT and the IT organization within accounting firms and within the accounting profession overall has really evolved. And now having a mature IT organization that can focus on project management is something that, you know, most firms are really dedicated to, because they know it's going to make them more successful in the long run.
Yeah, and I think you're part of that evolution in this profession, because something I've heard you speak on over the years is getting firms to think about or to recognize that IT projects are actually firm projects, right? And when you think about the role of a CIO, and how over the years the firm started to see, hey, the CIO's in the catbird seat within the organization and sees across all, most all of the departments kind of, is being brought in from every aspect. And naturally, that created a growth in that role in terms of expectations
Hmm.
and responsibilities around playing more of a leadership role in firm projects, because pretty much every firm project, right, Amanda, has a huge technology component nowadays in some way, shape, or
Absolutely.
form.
Yeah, there's like you said, every project has an IT or technology component to it. But that's also, I think, why we see in a lot of firms, the firm will bring projects to IT and let them lead those projects, because they know IT, being project focused, is going to get those projects done. And an example of that, in many firms that don't really have like a facilities team, if you will, that manages the building and the environment and all of those things. If those firms have to do a build out, or if they are moving, a lot of times the planning of that and execution of that project will fall on IT, not only because you have to have all of the technology implemented and buttoned up before you could do an office move like that, but because, again, it's very project based. And so to get things like that done, a lot of the firms, they'll lean on their IT leadership to get some of those things done.
So you've been a part of a lot of these projects, not only as a CIO, but now as a consultant, and helping kind of facilitate leaders through this, as well. And we've talked a lot about kind of the IT function thus far, but I know we've talked in the past that you see this project management skill set being essential across the firm. Okay. So where, Amanda, do you see, as you think about firms as a whole, even outside of the IT department, seeing project management just being really essential?
Yeah. In lots of areas, primarily because the number one skill for a project manager is communication. And I always laugh when I say that internally, of course, because through my studying for the PMP, like over and over and over again, John, all of the materials really, really highlighted that 90% of a project manager's job is communicating. I can't tell you how many times I read that, how many times in the practice questions, all of those things. John, the first question that I got when I took my PMP exam was, what's the number one skill, and how much time does a project manager spend using that skill? And I was like, okay, I'm so glad that I saw it a million times, because I knew 90% of a project manager's job is really communicating. And so they need to be able to communicate to different levels, to people with different backgrounds, with people maybe internally, externally. So communication is huge. Organization is another one. So, projects have a million moving parts. So they have to be able to manage the details, and they need to understand how, when these details change, it's going to impact other parts of the project. So you've got communication, you've got organization that are huge. You also need them to really be problem solvers. They need to be able to look at something and tackle it with a especially a problem or something that's unexpected, they need to be able to embrace that and say, okay, what can be done? How can we mitigate this risk? How can we still, execute on the project and keep it in scope and make sure that it's delivered on time? So if you think about that, if you think about the problem solving, the organization, and the communication, we're starting to see that skill set not only be leveraged from a project standpoint, but from an engagement standpoint. So engagement managers, if you will. And a lot of times we will hear project manager and engagement manager kind of used interchangeably. The difference really is, a project being kind of a one-time thing where there's a beginning and there's an end, and at the end of the project, like there's something new. Again, I'll go back to the example of a new technology is implemented. The engagement manager, they look at every single engagement, every audit, every consulting engagement as an individual project. And again, you need the same organizational skills, you need the same communication skills, you need the same problem solving skills for both your projects and your engagements as well. So we're starting to see a lot of firms ask, okay, how can project managers bring value to the firm and bring value to our clients as well?
Yeah, and I love the fact that you're talking about kind of both sides of that equation there, internal and kind of external with clients. You know, I think something that has happened too, and I want to get your feedback on this, if you think it's accurate or not, is I think years ago, especially with technology projects, firms thought they could outsource project management, right? Outsource the fact and say, oh, well, we're just going to rely on an external resource to manage what is a firm project. And I think we all know how that goes. And I think something I've heard you say over the years, Amanda, as a consultant, is your job when you're working with firms to help facilitate and navigate them through the process is not to be the project manager. Have someone internally that has that skill set, and really kind of take ownership of how that project is being managed. Are you still seeing that need in firms today?
Absolutely. And you can tell when you have a really good external partner that's going to help you implement something or help you do anything that's project based. You do want them to have a project manager, because you want to know that on their side of the aisle, they have someone that is responsible, a point person for communication, someone who's organizing everything. But yes, you want to make sure that internally you have a project manager as well, and that those two people, the internal and the external project managers, are working together, working well together to bring that organization and that communication to their respective sides, if you will. That just makes it, easier. You have one person who is accountable for really leading the project both internally and externally.
Yep. And you mentioned the kind of that engagement manager type role. And I think as we work with firms, and when I say we, in this instance, you and I, Amanda, through our various kind of consulting capacities, I think something we're seeing that I just want to highlight, based off a comment you made, is when managing those external client engagements, right? It's no longer up to each individual, let's say, partner to determine how to manage that client. There needs to be some standardization, some consistency, and as we work with firms on client experience, and as you work with firms on process improvement, and things of that sort. So are you seeing the need for, maybe the right phrase isn't centralizing project management as it pertains to client engagement? Maybe it is, but are you seeing a need for there to be increased consistency from that client engagement perspective?
And that's the key word there, John, is consistency. Because I love my project management. I have multiple hats, One is, lean and process improvement. So I can put on my lean hat. And that's something that else I think that it's very important is that we have to differentiate process improvement from project management. And what you're talking about is very important, building consistency. So no matter what, you do need a process. So you can apply lean to the process of your project management so that you can build efficiency, you can build consistency across the board so that it doesn't matter if it's one project manager to the next, then they're kind of plug and play. So that is very important. So although I do like to separate process improvement from project management, you do still need a process for your project management, and that can always be improved as well.
Yeah. No, and this conversation has been really good, Amanda. One question I kind of want to ask you just off the cuff here, because I think it's probably going to be important, because this project management type role across firms, I would say, is relatively new, or newish. Would you agree with that, Amanda, in terms of the need for that? Okay. And so I think one thing that we want to maybe emphasize with our audience here is the difference between project management and maybe an administrative professional. Okay. And just thinking about, both are important and both play key roles in this. But what advice would you give to our listeners, or kind of what thoughts would you give to our listeners, Amanda, to really help frame their thinking around the project management role and the fact that it is a unique and dedicated skill set?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that one of the first things that firms can do is start looking at the projects within your firm. Which ones would you consider successful? Meaning they were delivered on time, they were delivered on budget, and they were delivered within scope. So within the parameters of the original project that is defined. And then start looking at what can you learn from those teams and how they executed those projects. You can also make sure that you are investing in developing those communication skills, those problem solving skills, those organizational skills, and again, looking at a project as something that is delivered. So the Project Management Institute would define a project as something that has a clear start, a clear end, and delivers something new. So again, that would maybe a new product, the implementation of a new technology. So if you think about that and then think about the day-to-day work, the operational work that your administrative professionals do, you're going to start to see a difference there, and it takes some of the same skill set, but it may take some additional things like, again, problem solving, building buy-in, things like that. So when you're looking to differentiate those, look at what your administrative professionals are doing from an operational day-to-day standpoint and what they are doing from a project standpoint. And you're probably going to uncover some of those administrative professionals, or even some of your client service professionals that are really good at that communication and that organization and problem solving and things like that. And those are the ones that you really want to build off of. So once you've kind of differentiated and looked at what are your projects versus what are your operational tasks, start building those project management skills throughout the firm, and then start looking for the opportunity. So look at whether you want to call it a project manager, an engagement manager, start looking at, how that role can bring value to your client and how they can bring value to the firm using that unique skill set of communication, organization, and problem solving.
That's really good advice. So your kind of recommended next step, in summary, if I had to kind of say it back to you and you tell me if it's right or not, is probably really evaluating and understanding the projects and the history of projects within your firm. Is that correct, Amanda?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. And I love your definition of what a project is and what it isn't. I know we've had those conversations internally at Boomer, and your definition there to help us delineate between something that is a project and is not a project is really helpful to think about. Well, then how do we manage it? How do we strategize around it? How do we prioritize it? And all those things. So Amanda, that concludes kind of our time together on this episode of the Boomer Briefing. As always, thank you for being a part of this episode.
Always happy to be here, John. Let's talk again soon.
Absolutely. And for those listeners, if you enjoy these types of topics, we release new episodes every Tuesday morning. And each week we kind of rotate through the topic. So one week you may hear something on leadership, and then maybe the next week it's technology, process, talent, growth. And we really like to mix it up, but it's all focused on helping you solve a critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. So please subscribe to the podcast and stay tuned for the next episode. Thanks so much.